Let's generate our motivation. And realizing that, or trying to realize that there's no findable self who is listening to the teachers. Then let's start over. Okay, so understanding that there's no findable self that's listening to the teachings, then let's listen to the teachings with an attitude of compassion for ourselves and all beings. Also knowing that all these beings are not findable when we search for them, and ourselves as the person having compassion for these unfindable sentient beings is also not findable when searched for with analysis. So even though we can't isolate anything that is any of these objects, still they all arise and exist in dependence on each other and in dependence on their causes and conditions and on the mind that conceives and labels them. So it's in this way that things are like a dream or like an illusion, in that they appear one way but exist another. But still, because sentient beings have feelings and want happiness and don't want suffering, it's important to do our best to bring that about. And for that reason, we'll share the Dharma this afternoon. So, we had kind of completed number 36 in this book, and I was just noticing that in the book we got at His Holiness's initiation, the translation was of those in need, the 8 groups of those in need, was a little bit different. So I thought to go through it, because it just gives us, not that one's right and one's wrong, but it gives us more to think about in terms of helping sentient beings. Okay, so they listed the 8 groups. The precept is not going to help those in need specifically, but not limited to persons needing help. Okay, 1, in making a decision about something positive. Okay, so that corresponds with our first one here. 2 was in traveling. So that actually skips the second one and goes to the third one. Okay? And then C, in learning a foreign language, and that one is not on our list. It's a funny one. I don't understand how that got in there. 4th is in carrying out some task that has no moral fault. So that's like helping those who want to undertake a worthy enterprise. And then the next was in keeping watch over a house, temple, or their possessions, so protecting others' possessions, that we have. In stopping a fight or argument, that's a little bit different, because what we have in this book is reconciling those who are at odds with each other, whereas this one seems more like they're fighting or arguing at that moment and you intervene. The next one is in celebrating an occasion, so we have that one. And then the last one is in doing charity work, which we don't have. Yeah, but we have instead here the one on helping in festive occasions. it seems to me that helping somebody doing charity work would be more important than helping somebody in festive occasions. Okay, so I just thought to go through that because it just gives us more situations to think of. Yeah? And then, of course, the real thing to do is in our daily life when people ask us for help, look at our immediate response and then see, if there's spite or anger or laziness, something that would cause a transgression of not wanting to do it. Or if when people ask for help, we think, wow, this is so good, I can create some merit. Yeah, or I can help somebody. Can we turn off that center light there if nobody needs it? My eye keeps going up there. There we go. Is that okay? Everybody still see? Okay, so then 37 is not removing others' suffering. And this one says neglecting to serve the sick because of anger, spite, laziness, or indifference. And this one says avoiding taking care of the sick. Okay, so not removing others' suffering is much broader because it's not limited to physical suffering. Okay, so the explanation says the previous fault concerns not helping the sick in particular. Wait a minute, yes, I skipped one. Okay, let's go back here, sorry. So we're in the section now that is about not eliminating what harms others. And this point has two sections, not eliminating suffering and not eradicating its causes. So the first has two parts, failure to alleviate particular forms of suffering and failing to alleviate suffering in general. So I just got ahead of myself. Okay, so 36 is failing to serve the sick. So that's the same all across here. Okay, the misdeed consists of not helping sick people, whether we know them already or are meeting them for the first time, by nursing them, providing medicine, giving advice, encouragement, and so on. If anger or animosity motivates our refusal, the misdeed is associated with afflictions. When we are too slothful or lazy to help, the misdeed is dissociated from afflictions. Okay. We'll read through this and then we'll look at some examples. The exceptions are similar to the previous. In terms of the subject, us, there is no misdeed when we do not help a sick person for the following reasons. First is we're sick ourselves. Clear. If you're incapacitated, you can't help somebody. Second, we find someone else to help the sick person who moreover gets along with the patient very well. Yeah, so we find somebody else who can take care of them. But we have to make sure that the person we find is really willing to take care of the person and gets along with them, not that they're just going to come in there and give them an aspirin and leave. Okay. 3 is we're busy caring for another sick person. 4, we are not very intelligent or very good at looking after others. We have limited abilities to learn, reflect, and meditate, and therefore need to concentrate very hard on improving our understanding by study and meditation. Okay, so if we have some exceptional, we're really slow in learning the Dharma or whatever, then we need to focus on our study and meditation. However, I think that and this includes also, we're not very good at looking after others. So if you're not very good at doing it and you don't know what to do, then you don't want to intercede in that. But also you don't want to use this thing of, I'm kind of slow in my studies, so I can't help somebody, as an excuse. Because it's not a very good excuse, because if we're slow, then we also need to create merit, and helping somebody else is a way to create merit. Okay, there are exceptions in terms of the object, the people who are sick. So first, the patients are already receiving satisfactory assistance and have other protectors, so they aren't in dire need of help. Second, it's somebody who's capable of looking after themselves, so again, they don't really need help that urgently. Or 3, they have been ill for a long time and are well on the road to recovery. They can now do most things by themselves and will soon be completely cured. So again, not a great need. Okay. And an exception is made due to necessity, as when we are already involved in a very positive action, such as intense study, and assisting a sick person would be a serious obstacle to it. So if you're already doing retreat or intense study, you're very involved in it, and taking care of somebody would really take you away from all of that for weeks or months or whatever. And so I'm thinking sometimes in the monasteries, if a relative falls sick, they may call for the monk or nun, please come home and help your mother or father or somebody like that. And, the families are very close, so somebody, could very well, very often they do that. But this is kind of saying if you're involved in intense study, and practice, then it's not necessary that you go home, because that could take months, by the time you get there and take care of somebody and come back. But try and get somebody else who's already there who is capable to take care of the family member. But I'm also thinking in situations, sometimes we may be in a public place and a total stranger is sick. And what do we do? Yeah, I was in a shopping mall with my parents one time in Hong Kong, and somebody had an epileptic fit. Yeah, so what do you do in that situation? Yeah. So there's that kind of situation. There's a kind, like if you're traveling in India and you see other people who are traveling, who are sick, you don't know them. The Indies, the Westerners, kind of really bond when you're traveling together, and so even if you don't know people, you bond together to help each other if somebody's sick. But then it's strange, you get off the train, and if you see a very poor Indian beggar who's sick, you don't stop to take care of the person, and it's, or most people don't. And it's a hard situation, because it's really very complicated, because do you then take that person to a hospital, but you don't speak the same language with them? And do you pay for everything that they're doing? And what happens if their relatives are also beggars in the train station? They found at they had a place at one of the Dharma centers in Bodh where they wanted to, like a clinic to bring people, like a hospital for them to stay, and many people didn't want to go because a hospital is where you go to die, and they'll be separated from their family, so they would rather stay at home without treatment. So you have all these different cultural things that you have to deal with, and then the language difficulties. What do? Here's somebody who you don't even share the language. You can't say, I'm going to take you to the hospital and I'm going to do this and that. They could be terrified if you just pick them up and put them in a taxi. So it's, you run across those situations. And then also, there's 20, 30 people like that in the train station. Yeah? So, it's something to think about. There's a story in the Vinaya about one monk who was sick, and the other monks didn't want to take care of him, I don't know if he was too messy or dirty because he was sick, so they didn't, and he smelled bad, so they didn't want to go near him. And when the Buddha found this out, he was really quite upset. And so he went and nursed that monk back to health. Yeah, and then he really told the monastics, you have to take care of each other. You know, when somebody's sick, you have to care for each other.
Is this also the case when there are nuns and monks together and there's no monk who could help the monk, but only nuns, for example?
Okay, so what's the situation? If there's monks and a monk and a nun are in near proximity, and do you help that monk? Are you talking like in a monastery situation, or?
Yeah, maybe more in Western sides where no monasteries available, no centers, you know, but they're living there. Some monks and nuns are living together.
Okay.
So many, so they have to support.
Yeah, so there's monks and nuns all living in the Dharma center. Then, you know, does a nun care for a monk or a monk care for a nun? It's better to enlist the help of somebody who's the same sex as that person to help that person out. Because it involves going into their room, you know, and maybe handling their clothing or, you know, depending how sick they are and everything. And so it's better to have somebody of the same sex do that. If there's absolutely nobody, then clearly, you know, you do that. But if there's somebody else who can help. Now, on the other hand, if there's somebody who can provide a special service that other people can't, you know, if there's a monk who, you know, does something to his back, Venerable Tarpa is going to go help him. Yeah, and so, you know, even Khensa Rinpoche, when he was here, she did her physical test on him and everything like that. So in that kind of situation, that's okay, and you try and have somebody else in the room when you do that. Okay. Other comments? Questions? Have you ever been in situations where somebody's asked you to help them and they're sick and you just don't feel like doing it? Nobody has had that? Oh, you did? Okay. What'd you do?
I ended up helping when everybody else left. It wasn't really fun.
Did you? So you ended up helping them and the others left. Did you ask the others to help you out?
No. It was a situation where a long time ago, this person was dying of AIDS, and he was a student of mine, and he said, you know, when it comes to it, will you help? And I said, well, of course, I'll support you. And he said, oh, I have all these people lined up, and well, when it came down to it, they really were gone, and I didn't know them. So, you know, I was resistant because of the time that it was going to take, but in the end, he really didn't have anybody.
Yeah.
So there I was.
Yeah. So in a situation where somebody doesn't have anybody, then you help. In a situation where it's possible to enlist others' aid, then you ask other people, please come and help. Yeah. About other people? Yeah?
My mother was many years very sick, so she was in bed all the time, couldn't leave the house. And I was for some years at this place, but then she wanted me first that I stay at this place and go for work, not finish really the school, you know. And then I had a resistance. I didn't want her to take care of all this, and I didn't want her to bring money at home, and I wanted to study and go forward. So I couldn't see really the power in myself to do this, what she expected from me, so I actually went away. So, but in the end, she didn't let anybody help her really, so she only wanted to have somebody who bring money at home and help her to cleaning and take care of the kids like this. So I think it's good to look really what can you give, what's possible, and what the other person expects you to do.
Right. Yeah, I think it's very clear to see what they expect you to do. If they're expecting you to help them specifically or take care of other things that they can't manage, you know, what's the time that they might need help for? Are there other people around who could help, neighbors or whatever? and to just be clear about it. But it's also something to look sometimes at how we have some resistance. Yeah.
When you had trouble with your feet,
Uh-huh.
I could have helped you earlier, but I think that I had problems working through to find a way to do that.
Oh, because you didn't feel that I was receptive to the help earlier.
No, it was a little more complicated than that.
Oh.
But I don't think that I actually don't think I did as much as I could have from my side to resolve it.
Mhm.
You know.
But they're healed. Yeah. Okay, so it's something, especially in a community situation, to really try and take care of each other. And I've really seen that a lot in the community. Although I think in many ways we rely on Venerable Jigme to do it, so we don't go to check on, see how somebody is, or don't bring them lunch because we expect her to do it. So I think sometimes we should really check because maybe she needs a break and some relief. Yeah. Okay. Okay, then the next section is not eliminating suffering, but failing to alleviate suffering in general. So now here's the one that says not removing other suffering. So the previous fault concerns not helping the sick in particular. The present misdeed consists of not eliminating the suffering or problems with which beings are confronted in general. The same exceptions apply to both. As before, the misdeed is associated with afflictions when it is motivated by anger and so forth, and is dissociated from them when it is inspired by sloth or laziness. Okay, here it says not alleviating the suffering of others, and here not alleviating suffering, and here it has specific groups of people. Okay, so not alleviating the suffering of the blind, the deaf, amputees and cripples, tired travelers, those suffering from any of the 5 obstacles preventing mental stability, those with ill will and strong prejudice, and those who have fallen from positions of high status. So this brings up a whole lot of things if you start thinking it. Okay, not helping the blind, the deaf, amputees, cripples, that makes sense, If we're out in public and we see somebody needing something, to go and extend a hand if we can. But it also doesn't specify, not alleviating the suffering. Well, how much suffering? Yeah, does it just help somebody open the door when they can't get in? Or, what happens if they're also upset, and what happens if they need help doing whatever errand they're doing? Yeah, and so the question comes, how much do we change our plans and extend ourselves to help somebody else? Yeah. And that can sometimes be a hard one because we have something in our mind that we want to do and get done, and then something happens. And I know that they've done these studies sometimes where they check, especially there was a study where there was, somebody was going to go, I can't remember exactly how it was, but they tested people who were going to speak at a big hall, having something to do with benefiting others, and then on the way going there they staged something where somebody was sick or fell or whatever to stop and see if these people stopped to help them.
Oh my God.
And many of them didn't. Yeah, but then it's a tricky thing because at that point, do you feel that the needs of the whole group in the auditorium, maybe there's 100 people, are more pressing than helping one individual because maybe somebody else, you're in a public place and somebody else can come along and help them? You know, but then you think, well, maybe it's worthwhile to stop a little while and at least recruit somebody else to help that other person instead of just going on your way without saying anything. Yeah, and same thing with traffic accidents. You know, sometimes you don't know, do you stop and help, or you know, is what you're going to do just going to be to get in the way? And it's better to wait for, you know, the emergency services to come. I guess they're the best way to help us dial the emergency services. Yeah. But I was in a situation once, I was walking to, it's kind of related to this. I was walking to DFF and in Magnolia Village, and there were two men outside arguing, and one man just took the other man and slammed him into the wall. I was across the street, and I thought there was going to be, you know, a big fight there. He might have slammed him in the wall twice, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, what do I do? You know? As it happened, there were other people around, and they called the police on their cell phone, but before the police could even get there, the man who slammed this guy had gone away. Yeah. But you think in those kinds of situations, you know, what do you do? Yeah. And especially now when so many people have guns, do you even get involved if two people are quarreling in public? Yeah. Uh-huh.
In Germany, we had a big discussion. I think there was a man who was helping a young man who got involved in a fight with another young man. And the other man was drunken, and he was biting the others and looked like he had a knife in his hand. And then this older man came to help, and actually he got killed then by this young drunken man. And this brought a discussion into the society. How much safety do we want? So do we want to install more cameras, and what's the individual responsibility? How far can we go, and how can we protect people, so young people especially, that they not get in this pressure to have even knives, you know, and get drunken into the underground and connected with people.
Yeah. Yeah, it really, those situations bring up a lot of questions. There was something in New York that happened earlier this year where somebody was robbing a pharmacy, and an off-duty detective or somebody was there and went to help, and he wound up getting killed. Yeah, so it's really difficult nowadays to know how to help, when to help. And then, like you were saying, it's nice in Germany, they had the discussion of, well, how to stop the young kids from getting the weapons and getting drunk and using them to start with. Yeah. Yeah. In America, we don't even consider that. Everybody has their right to carry arms and their right to get drunk, and yeah, it's really, it's scary. You know, because I remember years ago, do you remember when there was some big public discussion because somebody was in New York calling for help outside of an apartment building and nobody went to help them? Do you remember that? And there was this huge public discussion, and you know, and people were saying, you know, look, we really need to go out, and when somebody's crying for help, go help them, you know. But I'm wondering if now, because of all the guns, people are too afraid to do that, and the way they help is to call the police. Yeah?
The whole Good Samaritan is getting challenged or threatened. You know, we want to do it. There's parts that want to do it, but then there's also the safety of one's own life.
Right. Yeah.
But I also think, you know, those stories where the Good Samaritan gets killed, gets in the paper. And I'm sure there's many, many times.
Oh, yeah.
Still where someone does help, it doesn't get in the paper, and he doesn't get killed, and
Right.
he doesn't get killed, and it works quite well.
Yeah.
You know? So it's like we don't even really know, you know, it's,
Mm-hmm.
the news is so fear-based. I just was looking at the news before our internet went down and saw this very disturbing story story about there's now a line of clothing for carrying concealed mental.
Yes.
Did you see
Yes, I read that.
And you can get, shirts and pants and that very fancy with a hidden pocket so your knife and your gun won't show. And it was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
It's so extreme. But then I think, this is not what most people are doing. It's sad, it's out there, and it's bizarre in a way. It's kind of the way this country, some parts of it are going, but I don't think the average person is going to run down and, get a concealed weapon shirt or,
Yeah.
It's like this is what gets in the news, is what we're drawn to listen
Yeah.
to.
Right.
I think what it does is we get used to it then, and then the desensitization of how deplorable it is, actually, how frightening it is.
Right.
I do think that the tendency, although I have had many experiences even recently of people stopping to help, or I've come on accidents and been a part of the people who helped in that situation. But not too many years ago, I had a flat tire or something on I-90 between Coeur d'Alene and Catalville. And I've had many flat tires on the side of the road in my life. And there was a time when people would just stop immediately, right and spin. And on this particular one, so many cars went by in the middle, and I didn't have a cell phone. So many cars went by in the middle of the afternoon before somebody finally stopped, and I said, can I use your phone? But it just triggered memories of how quickly aid had come earlier in my life.
Yes.
So I think people are not as quick to give because of the climate now.
Yeah.
That was my assumption based on it, but I was surprised at how long it took.
Yeah.
Because I was out there, I had a little white flag out.
Damsel in distress. Yeah. So it's something, to look at. What is the situation? Where, how can we help? How can we help in a safe way? And so on. What does helping really mean? Yeah. Like even the police, they hate domestic disputes because those are sometimes the most violent, horrible things.
More of them get killed statistically.
Yeah, more police get killed in a domestic dispute than in other ways. Yeah. It's a lot to think about in here, huh? Okay, so then helping tired travelers, that makes sense. And we should think about that here at the Abbey, that when people arrive, we should offer them something to drink at least. Yeah. And then those suffering from any of the 5 obstacles preventing mental stability. So I think that's like people who have a lot of grief, something that's happened in their lives, so there's a lot of grief, they're not so mentally stable. So somebody's facing a lot of loss, and so to comfort people who are grieving, who are upset or angry about something, that may, it's very interesting because some people are more afraid of helping in situations of physical violence, and other people are more afraid of helping when somebody's emotionally upset. And then just the contrary, some people find helping others who are emotionally upset very easy. They don't hesitate to do that. But to intervene when there's a physical confrontation, they really hesitate to do that. So it's interesting, isn't it?
It's good when you're trained in both sides, kind of how to act in this way. It's possibly because we don't know what to do, how to do it.
Yes.
But in Germany, you can go to a training and learn to help in situations like this. There are special courses for this, or for emotional difficulties.
Oh, that's very nice.
I was thinking when we take Manaus, for example, how to deal with people, and I was thinking, this would be nice to know how to deal with people who have difficulties, mental difficulties, for example. So maybe this is more a case in monasteries or centers than physical difficulties.
Yeah. Yeah, in our situation, we may very well we may very well find ourselves helping people with mental difficulties rather than physical difficulties, and so to know how to do that. Yeah. So this is something actually we can talk about. Sometimes I like bringing different situations that people write me about and discussing it at lunch and see, what people would do. So I can do that some more. Share with you. Yeah. I'm going to be very, very helpful. Yeah. And then the first aid course, I think, that Venerable Jigme was doing, I think I know I need to hear it many more times so I get the confidence that if I'm in that situation, I know what to do. Besides, say, you in the plaid shirt, call 911, and then come back here and help me. Yeah. Although, they did make that point, so we remember that one. Yeah, so that's good. Yeah. Okay. Those with ill will and strong prejudice. So, if somebody is really in a bad way, full of, a lot of hatred and anger and spite and resentment, then helping that person kind of chill out a little bit. You seem to have something.
Those are the situations where I don't know whether I can help at all. Like if somebody's really spouting off especially in an angry, prejudicial way, sometimes being in situations, you just go, oh my gosh. Maybe with NBC now, after having watched what Marshall did in the taxi driver, the story of being in a taxi cab, and the taxi driver was really spouting off some racial remarks, and so he talked about, it really, I feel hurt when you are, I don't even know what he was feeling, but he was feeling and needing, being able to address that person in that way really struck me because of having been in some situations where I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to counter that person's strong opinion.
Right.
But using NBC actually might be useful.
Yeah. So if somebody's saying something really mean and cruel, prejudice or not, but just like they have so much emotion, especially if they're angry, sometimes you don't know what to do. And sometimes actually it's hard to communicate with that person. It depends how angry they are because they're in this refractory period where they can't take in any new information. Yeah, but then at other times maybe they're just spouting off out of habit and they aren't feeling it so strongly, and then like using NVC you could say, when I hear words like that I feel very uncomfortable or I feel hurt or whatever it is.
Sounds like you feel.
Yeah. So to know, because it's hard. I mean, when we're not with people who are angry, and especially people with prejudice, we always think, oh yes, when I run across those people, I'm going to stand up and say something. But then when we run across them, suddenly we go, oh, I don't know what to say, and they're so angry. How can I even face that anger?
This is the one that I have difficulty with because I don't, in that situation, I oftentimes don't think the person's open.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this might be a way to make them open to express your reaction, your feelings and needs.
Yeah.
And kind of put a complete spin on it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because I think if you try and argue with those people about their ideas, they just often get more revved up. But if you talk about how their behavior is affecting you, they have to switch a little bit and think about that.
To reverse the situations on them. My father was very prejudiced and he would say things, but I just, it's like I just say, well, what if they all thought you should go back to Ireland? Talking about, they should go back to Mexico or Africa or, And I go, well, what if someone told you had to go back to Ireland? It'd be the same thing, Daddy. And he said, oh, I guess I've listened to these comments all my life. And I finally put that out there in a compassionate way, not in a confrontational way.
Right.
It was like, oh, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Change.
Yeah. Good. That's good. Okay, and those who have fallen from positions of high status. So somebody who, had a position of high status, and then maybe the stock market went down, maybe they got fired, maybe they were accused of something they didn't do, who knows what, then, people are in mental turmoil and helping them. I think a lot nowadays, the people we're going to wind up helping is people who are getting divorced. Yeah, because so often people come and they're just completely bound up because of a divorce situation, and so, how to help them.
Well, this makes me think of it's a little different, but one thing my father has said to me a lot recently is where he lives now, and he likes about it a lot, is that you're not losing your sense of identity.
Mm-hmm.
People get old and they move into nursing homes.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I think, or situations like that, they feel like they've lost kind of a certain kind of dignity,
Mm-hmm.
the way you're treated and this and that. And I noticed that this is one really beautiful point about this place where they are. And it's, I think, the thing of holding kind of dignity and respect for people.
Mm-hmm.
This happens a lot with the elderly.
Okay.
People who are losing their function in life.
Okay. So here, when we're talking about alleviating the suffering of others, it could mean with the elderly and giving them attention and respect and care, because they so often feel like they're pushed off and neglected. Last week when we were in the airport, I was walking somewhere and there was one lady sitting in a wheelchair, and she was just all alone and just sitting there like that. And I walked past her and I smiled at her, and she kind of didn't know what to do. And I went this way, and then on the way back, she was still there, and then I stopped and I said, do you need anything? And she said, no, I'm okay. But I felt from my side like, boy, she looks so miserable and lonely in an airport. So, I don't know. But, treating the elderly with respect, I think also treating inmates with respect. That's one of the big things when we go into prisons. The thing that just touches the guys so much is that we treat them the way we normally treat people, which they hardly are ever treated like that. And even when we write letters, just treating people, in a respectful way. And not writing hateful, spiteful, blaming things. So, yeah. Okay, then the next one. So here is the section on not eradicating the causes of suffering. So it is not showing those who are careless what is suitable. And here, not teaching the reckless in accordance with their character. So it's similar but not exactly the same. And not explaining what is proper conduct to those who are reckless. So slightly, different wordings. It's interesting, gives you a different perspective on it. We see people who clearly do not know how to behave with regard to this life or future lives. They are apparently unable to determine what is in their best interests and what they should preferably avoid doing. When we see people who are on the brink of making a serious mistake or who have already made one, it is our responsibility to do our best to point out their error and to give them good advice. We must show them what is right in a manner that corresponds to their abilities. Okay, if they are doing great harm to themselves or to others and we fail to say anything to them due to our feelings of anger or animosity towards them, the misdeed is associated with afflictions. It is not associated with afflictions when our inaction is due to sloth or laziness. It's interesting, he never mentions fear in any of the, and these last few ones, sometimes people are very afraid of helping the sick. They don't even want to go into the hospital to visit Aunt Ethel. They're afraid of the hospital. They're afraid of seeing anything ugly. It's interesting that fear is never mentioned here. And yet, I think in terms of helping the suffering, very often. Do you think think so. That's
In a way.
one reason why people don't help is they're afraid. I mean, we were just talking of being afraid because of physical conditions, but also being afraid of, somebody's anger, being afraid of feeling intimidated ourselves, or not. Some people are like, they really freak out when they see other people cry. They can't handle it. They don't know what to do. They're afraid of it. All sorts of things like this.
Make a mistake and cause more harm than help.
Yeah, so being afraid to make a mistake and cause more harm. Yeah.
Trying to help someone where there's never going to be a solution.
Yeah.
It's a lot of addiction and mentally ill people. It's like they just suck you in more and more.
Yeah, so trying to help somebody where you feel that there isn't a lot that you can do, or where you're going to get sucked in and it's going to be more than you can handle. Like you said, sometimes helping somebody who has an addiction or somebody who's mentally ill. But then we have to, I think at those times, that's where we really need a lot of clarity about what is helping them. And we may try a certain kind of help, and if that doesn't work, then we know that those people need professional help. And then helping them means getting them to the place where they can get the professional help. Yeah. So I mean that's something to really hold in mind. I remember I was living at one Dharma center, and somebody came there who was on meds for some mental illness, and the guy in the kitchen thought it would be so great to get her off the meds and have her, just be happy without the meds. And she stopped the meds, and then she was running up and down the corridors naked. And, and so you really have to think, what does it mean to help somebody? Yeah, and in her case, then what happened is the center had to call her family, and say, please come and, help her. So it's, sometimes in all this thing about helping others, to really sit and think what is help and what isn't. And when do we intervene and when don't we? Especially in situations of addiction, let's say. Yeah. And it depends on a relationship with the person. If we know that they can be very manipulative and that we fall for it, then it may be better that we don't try and help them. Okay. On the other hand, maybe we should also try to improve ourselves so that we don't fall for that kind of manipulation, and so that we can remain strong and steady and clear. Yeah, that's the best thing to be able to do. Yeah, but these things can really be quite challenging. Here it's talking about, maybe somebody who is about to do some great, negative karma, or who's just committed negative karma, and then trying to talk to them in a way that they can understand it. I used to, when I walked around Green Lake, see all these people fishing, and clearly I can't go up and say, please don't fish. Yeah, I mean I could, but I don't think it would go over very well. Yeah, so there's those situations, but then maybe there's another situation where it's a relative who's going out fishing. And can you, do you feel okay going to that relative and saying, fish want to live and so on too, or do you not even try because you're afraid that you assume that they're going to get mad at you, so you don't even try saying anything. Yeah. It's hard sometimes, or if when you're with people, especially in families or at a work situation where one person is bad-mouthing another person and scapegoating another person. How do you deal with that skillfully? Because sometimes if you try and stick up for that person, then the other people get even angrier, and if you tell them don't talk like that, then they also get angry. So in this way, I think NVC can be helpful, because if you just state how that kind of speech affects you, then maybe there's a chance that they can hear it. Maybe not. Yeah. But in so many of those situations, we don't do anything because we're afraid of what other people are going to think of us. Aren't we? Yeah? Are they going to dislike me? Are they going to turn and criticize me? Yeah? So we back away and we don't even try. Yeah. So maybe we need to think creatively about how to handle these kinds of situations.
I find it's very helpful in those situations to try to just change the subject. Like sometimes if they're really wound up and it doesn't look like,
Yeah.
it looks like they're not going to back off or something.
Right.
And I don't really want to deal with all that,
Mhm.
just to change the subject or say, I need to go now.
Yeah.
I mean, because sometimes that is about the most skillful thing you can do.
Yeah, if it's a one-on-one conversation, sometimes the best thing is just to exit and say, I have to go. But sometimes when you're with a group, you can protect your own mind by leaving. Yeah, but it's not stopping the others. Yeah. So, in this one, I think sometimes you have to have a special kind of relationship with somebody to be able to give them this kind of advice and to have them hear. Because people so often don't like being corrected. Yeah. But then often, I've also had the experience where I think, how can I don't want to say something, they're just going to get mad at me, they're going to get defensive, blah, blah, blah. But I make myself say something, and then afterwards the person says, thank you so much, I really appreciate it that you said that, and that you warned me. Then I realize, all my fear is really stupid, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So, okay, so here there's some exceptions to this one. So the first exception concerns the subject, okay, which is us. So we do not know what is best for the other person, or if we do, we feel incapable of communicating it properly. So in those kind of situations, it's not a fault not to help the reckless. 2, we leave the person in the hands of someone who is better at explaining these matters than we are. Yeah, so sometimes that is a good solution. If we can't help them, then introduce them to somebody who can, or put them in the care of somebody who can. And there are 4 exceptions in relation to the object, the people to be helped. 1, the people are perfectly capable and have sufficient knowledge to find the solutions or choose the right course of action themselves. So that's, would be assuming that you're dealing with reasonable people, who really aren't so reckless. 2nd, they have qualified spiritual masters or teachers to guide them. Yeah, so you see, somebody who's about to make a big ethical mistake, maybe breaking a precept or something, and they have teachers to guide them. But still, it really depends on the situation, because sometimes that person is not near their teacher, and very often, or sometimes even they are, the person doesn't want to go to their teacher to ask for help. And then often, at least with Tibetan teachers, they won't say anything at all, and then the person just does whatever. So sometimes, we might have to speak up more, but try and be as tactful as we possibly can. Okay, 3, they are aggressive and hostile and would most likely take our suggestion badly or misinterpret them. Okay. And 4, they are fundamentally disrespectful and unappreciative and would disregard our advice or react adversely to it. Okay. But some of those are really assuming that we know how the other person's going to respond. Yeah. An exception is made out of necessity when it is better for the people in question not to receive our advice because it will force them to think, to question themselves, and so on. Okay, so to not intervene when we know the person's capable of figuring the situation out themselves, and that they need to really exercise their mental muscles to do that. Yeah?
I wonder what you think about the cultural, I'm wondering about one of the qualified teachers and the cultural aspects of our psychological care in the West versus in the Tibetan culture, sort of mental illness or things like that. They seem like we come from quite a psychological model.
Right. Yeah, so your question's about helping people with mental illness and the difference in psychological models between, let's say, Tibetan culture and Western culture. Yeah, there is a big difference. In a Tibetan culture, when somebody has mental problems, they take them to a lama to do puja because they think that they have spirit interference or something like that. And so they'll do the puja, and then sometimes the person gets better. In our culture, that doesn't always work so well because people, some people may do that, but many people work on a very different psychological model, and so, want psychological talk therapy. And then other people just want to take those people and give them meds. Yeah, and so much I think is involved in the culture. I was reading once about women I think it was in Malaysia many years ago, because the culture was such that middle-aged women weren't allowed to really express their feelings when they were unhappy about something. So very often what they would do is they would just have some episode where it looks like they're completely, out of control emotionally, and then, they would be treated for having a spirit offense, but in the process they would say what it was that was bothering them, and other people could hear it, and after they got the remedy for the spirit offense, then they calmed down. But it could be that that's what they had to do because otherwise their needs and concerns wouldn't be heard in the society. Yeah. Actually, when I was in Dharamsala one year, I was sharing a room with somebody who was doing anthropological research, and she had a young Tibetan woman who was translating for her. And this young Tibetan woman was in love with somebody at the TCV school, but her parents wanted her to marry somebody else. And she tried to say, I don't want to marry that guy. I don't like him. I want to marry this guy. But the parents wouldn't listen. And she had what my friend thought was a nervous breakdown, but what in her parents' mind, they took her to the Lama, and she was saying, I don't want to marry this other person. I want to marry this person, and she was acting like this. And then the Lama did a blessing or something. She calmed down. The parents heard what it was that was sort of freaking her out so much, and then they said, okay, you can marry who you want to. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, when people don't have avenues to express how things come out in different cultures. Yeah, I mean, it's the same with psychosomatic illness, which people have in this culture. When they can't express things, then it often comes out, in a physical thing, and then somehow, that it can come out what's really bothering them. Yeah.
It's very true. Before the women's lib movement, women would have nervous breakdowns. That's what they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and either they got put on tranquilizers so they didn't feel anything, or they spent a lot of time in psychotherapy talking about what they didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember that in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
It was just real common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For women to do that.
Yeah. when you aren't given space to say when it's not socially acceptable, then it comes out in other ways. So it depends again on which culture we're in, what kind of person we're going to help. Yeah, and when people, some people are brought up in cultures where there's a lot of shamanism, and they feel their good energy got taken away, or somebody else did black magic on them, or whatever, and we have to explain things according to their paradigm, and this happens a lot in Singapore. The people there really, talk about spirits and black magic. I mean, it's a modern culture, but there's still very much that in their culture. Huh? And in certain pockets in our culture, too. Yeah, and then you have people in our culture who go to the other extreme and say, there's nothing psychological, just give them a pill and that'll solve the problem. So... Okay, so that's it for now. When you think, when you're thinking about this and you come up with situations in your life that apply to this, bring them up to the community, because I think it can be really helpful if we discuss specific situations and, how to act and help people in those specific situations, because it helps us all learn new skills and become a bit more creative, because we all have different backgrounds, so we know how to help in different situations.